Real estate investment practice problem using Excel. Excel amortization schedule with PivotTable. Get ready because it's time to raise the stakes with real estate. Here we are in our Excel worksheet. If you have access to the Excel worksheet, would like to follow along, note that we have 3 tabs on down below, an example tab, a practice tab, and a blank tab. If we move on over to the example tab, which is in essence the answer key, we have the information on the left-hand side. We'll be constructing our amortization schedule with an eye towards making a table from it, which we can then use to add our slicer as we did last time, but our major focus here is going to be using that information to create a pivot table information with it. So that's going to be the goal. On the second tab, we have the practice tab where you already have the amortization table and the normal table slicer implemented, and then you could just go right to the pivot table if you would like to do so. However, we're going to go to the blank tab over here, reconstruct the amortization table, just so we can do so keeping in mind the idea that we're going to be adding a table, and then we'll add the pivot table from there if you want to jump to the future point of this presentation. Because you've already built the table in the past, you can do so. Okay, so here's going to be our information on the left-hand side. We've got the home loan, once again, the $500,000, the down payment, the 20%, that's the percent. The down payment, $100,000, then the loan amount is going to be the $400,000. That's what we will be working with as we construct the amortization table. Years, 30 years. That means month, 30 times 12 is 360. The rate, 5%. Payments using the payment schedule, $2,147.29 about. So now we're going to construct our table. I'm going to do it much faster this time because we've seen it in the past. I just want to construct it with an eye towards making it into a table as opposed to not having a table for it. That difference starts with the headers, because if I was not going to make it into a table, I would use multiple different rows here. If I'm going to make it into a table, I have to put everything in one row and possibly use the wrap text feature. That could have a problem in that it's going to increase the width of the row, which could have an impact on other things such as the data on the left-hand side and other tables we would want to put on the right-hand side. So that's kind of the trade-off. If I go to the home tab up top, I'm going to get back to my home tab, and then we'll type in our headers. So I'm going to say years, and then I'm going to say months. So these are the 2 periods I'd like to be breaking out in the table. We've got the payments, and then we've got the interest tab, loan reduction. Here's the longer one, which normally I would put in 2 separate rows, but I'm going to put it in one row here because I want to build it into a table. And then we have the loan balance, also a longer type of items that I would usually put into 2 rows, but I want to keep it in one row here. Now note that if you want to then double click on this and then move this down and have it wrap, you could do it this way. I could say I want to tell it where I want it to wrap and say Alt Enter, and that's one way that you can wrap the text, widen the cell a little bit, and then you could do it that way. That way you can tell it exactly where you want it to wrap if you had multiple words. Or you could go, if I go to the home tab here, alignment, and use the wrap text, it'll usually pick the proper place to wrap the text approximately. So those are 2 methods. Just note if you want more control, you can use that Alt Enter. Note, of course, that as we do those, no matter what method we use, we've widened this row, which does have an impact on stuff outside of our table, including over here in the data and over to the right. That's why I would avoid it if you can. Oftentimes. The other option is a very wide column that would then take the entire header, but that sometimes is not doable depending on how long your header is. Okay, so now I'm going to select these headers. I usually make them black and white, so I'm going to go up to the home tab. Let's first center them. Alignment, let's go ahead and center it. Then we'll go to the font group. I'm going to hit the bucket, going to make this one black, and then we can't see the text until we make the A here, make the lettering white, and so there's my headers. I'll usually start with the months, and so I'm going to say 0, 1, 2. We're going to be paying monthly. There's going to be 360, 30 times 12. Selecting that row, putting our cursor on the fill handle, clicking, and dragging all the way down to 360. We're looking at the 360. We see that nice little indicator helping us out there as we get down to the 360, which is quite a ways, but still easy to do within Excel due to the fact that we have this nice feature for it. And then we're going to go to the Home tab, Alignment and Center. So we'll center that out. Then we're going to do our little trick over here for the years so that I can populate a year. Now, it's really important to be populating each year. So in other words, I can't say like this is going to be year 1, which covers this whole thing down to 12, and then year 2 starts here. That might be nice for me to look at visually, but it doesn't work well in a pivot table. What I have to do is name that each of the rows are going to be in a particular year. So when we use the pivot table, it knows what to do. So remember, when you work with a pivot table in particular, you basically want data in each of the cells. So we're going to do our little trick here in order to populate the years and get the proper year. That little trick that we looked at last time is to say equals. I'm going to be in the cell D3. We're going to round down, select our round down function, and then we're going to select the 12, which is the end of the first year, 12 months. We're going to divide that by 12, which will give us 1 in this case. And then we've got to say comma and tell it where we want it to round down, which digit. In other words, if you put a 0, that is indicating the whole number digit, and enter. So there we have it. I'm going to try to prove this to ourselves by copying it down to number 13, which means I should have a 1 for all these items and then a 2 at number 13. So we're going to go ahead and put our cursor on the fill handle, drag it on down, see if it does what we think it does. Is it even? Let's go to the number group, add some decimals. Yes, it has rounded it. Looks like it's doing what it's supposed to do. If we double click on this one down here, of course, it took the 24 round down function divided by 12 to give us 2, and that's good because we're on year 2 there. Let's go ahead and then copy this on down, put our cursor on it, double click on the fill handle, dragging that all the way down. We got one little thing we got to do down at the bottom to make this right because it doesn't quite work all the way down here because we're out of data. So on these last couple, on the last period, I'm going to delete them, and I'm going to use this little trick. We're just going to say equals the one above it, and then when I copy that down, they'll all equal the one above it. So I'm just going to copy that down, and there we have it. So they're all set now. We're all set. Let's go back up to the top. Let's center this. I'm going to select the entire column, column D, Home tab, Alignment, Center, and then Center again, centering it. I'm also going to put a 0 up top to make sure that we have something in each cell for the pivot table. I don't need anything in the payment cell, but I'm going to put 0, 0, 0, because once again, for the pivot table, I want something populated in every cell within our data set. Then we're going to pick up our loan balance, which is going to be equal to the 400,000 on the loan balance. We're going to add our payment here. So we're going to add our payment. This is going to be equal to that 214729. I want that to be the same all the way down. I'm just going to autofill all the way down. Therefore, I need an absolute reference. F4 on the keyboard, $ before the B and 9. You only need a mixed reference, but an absolute one works. And then we're gonna calculate the interest. Also note that I didn't add pennies here, so you could add pennies, but it kind of clutters up your table. Just depends on how much detail you want to see. Interest is going to be calculated prior balance, which is of course the loan balance at this point, times the rate, 5%. That's the yearly rate, so we're going to have to divide it by 12. That rate also outside of our data set, therefore we need to make it absolute. F4 on the keyboard, $ before the B and the 7, so when I copy it down, it doesn't move that cell down. We only need a mixed reference. Absolute one works though. Divided by 12, because that's the yearly rate and we want the monthly amount, and tab. Now we're going to do our subtraction problem. This equals the 2147 about minus the 1667 about, loan reduction then at the 481. The loan balance after the first payment then is going to be equal to the 400,000 minus the 481. And there we have it. Now we could just select those four numbers and simply put our cursor on the fill handle and just double click on it. And it should populate all the way down, populating all the way down. And there we have it. We're at 0 at the bottom, so it looks like it did what we should do. We're not going to add the total column as I would if we weren't going to add the table, because the table will add the total column. The table will add the total. So then we're going to go back up top. Let's add the table. You can select this entire range of data to add the table, or you could put your cursor somewhere in the table to add the table to it. So now we're going to make it into an official table instead of what they call an array, which is still kind of like a table, but it's just an array of data. Make sure that you don't have multiple cells grouped, or it will try to make a table out of those 4 cells. Put your cursor in the middle of the table somewhere. Also note that you want everything populated. Remember, I put zeros up top and whatnot. That will make it more likely that you will not have problems with the table. If you have a bunch of blank cells, for example, if you didn't put a 1 on each year, that's going to cause you problems. Okay, so we're going to go up top, insert. We're just going to add the table. So there it is, a table. It looks like it's picking up the right table place. So I'm going to say, okay, table has been entered. Now I'm going to make it our nice, we could still format the table inside. So if I want to color it our nice little blue that we've been doing before, I'll go ahead and do that. I'm going to select this entire table on down instead of having this little striped thing here. And we'll say, let's just make it our blue. Go to the home tab. We'll say we're just going to make it color that blue, which is right there. If you don't see it, more standard. That's the blue that we use. That's the one. And then we could say, I want my brackets around it font group, and then bracket it like that, because their tables are colorings are not always optimal. And then we're going to say the total down here. Now we're not going to add the total. What I'm going to do is click on the table, go to the table design, and they've got this nice little table style options. Say, do I want a total row? Yeah, we do. And then we just want to total up, say this one. We'll total that up by just using the sum. Instead of actually doing the sum function, we just tell it, use the sum thing to do that. And then we'll sum this one up. This one I don't want to sum. That doesn't make any sense because this is the ending balance. And then you could have our check numbers here if we wanted check numbers. Make sure you don't put the check numbers right next to the table, or else it's going to think that they're part of the table. And I'm just going to pull my check numbers and say, is that what I calculated up here in my data? Just to give it a double check. Total payments. And then the interest I calculated up top was like, that's the interest. That looks the same. Loan balance, of course, we picked up at top for our check figure. 400. Check. Roger that. Roger out. Everything checks off. Let's move forward. So now, of course, you could add your slicer, which we did last time. So we got the nice slicer tool, which we can go to the table designs. You got to be in the table. Table designs, slicer. Slice it up. Typically years is what you might want to be slicing it into. And so there we have that, breaking it out by year. So that's nice. I'll close the filter out. We did that last time. Now we're going to make the new thing. The new stuff's happening here with the pivot table, which is another way that we can easily kind of break out that yearly data. So let's put our cursor in the table. And then now I'm going to add another table, this time pivot table. We're going to go to the insert tab up top. We're going to go to the tables, and we want to make it a pivot table. Pivot table. Now you have the options on your pivot table to either the default is usually to put it in a new worksheet, meaning it will make a new worksheet down below. That's often a useful thing to do, but you can keep the pivot table in the same worksheet as well, which is what we'll do here so we can put everything in kind of one spot. So I'm going to say I want to put it in the existing worksheet. Then you need to select a location. You typically need to be up at the top in the row 1, or else it might not allow you to add the pivot table. So I'm going to be all the way up top in row 1. And then we've got the table range is table 5. That's the name of the table. So that looks correct. And that's all we need. So I'm just going to say, let's go ahead and say, okay. And then it gives us our pivot table. So I'm going to scroll over to the right. That's where our pivot table is. Nothing's there yet. So this scene would look the same if we added a new tab as well. So now this is where we can construct our pivot table. It looks daunting over here, but we're just going to make a basic one. And so it'll be fairly easy to do. Oftentimes, if you select your items, you'll be able to basically, it'll guess where the things should go down below. So in other words, we've got our ranges up top that we can use for our pivoting. We've got the filters, columns, rows and values on down below. What we would like to do is see this information by year is what we want to do. So what we want to do is take a look at the years, and then if I just click on the years up top, it pulls it down. Now notice it pulled it into the values because there's numbers in the year column. If there weren't numbers, if it was text, it would probably pull it into the rows. I want it in the rows, so I'm going to pick that number up. I'm going to pull it into rows over here, and that gives us our rows 30. So there's our 30 years that we have. So that looks good. And then we want to pick up our values. I don't need the months because I don't want to see it in months. I want to see it in years and then total up each of those years. So I'm then going to say I'd like to see the payments by year. There it is. So now we got the payments summed up. This is how much we're going to pay each year. Now notice it's a pretty ugly looking number format. They used a general number format with 4 decimals. To fix that, you hit the drop down here. We hit the drop down and we say, what do I want to do? I want to go to values, and then we're going to say, now here, we're going to use the sum function. That's the default that it chose to use, meaning it simply summed up everything with a 1 in the row. That's why you need a 1, as we saw in the table, in all the months that are in month 1, and then it summed them up. So it did that correctly, but I want to format it down here. I'm going to go to the number format, and I usually like making it currency, and then brackets in red, removing the $sign, and I don't need the pennies because that kind of clutters my stuff. So I'm going to remove the pennies, and there it is. I'll say OK, and then OK. So there you got a neater format there. Let's do the interest. Same thing on the interest. It pulled it down to the values tab. That's what we wanted it to do generally. And so that looks good. I'm going to hit the drop down and format this one. Format. It summed up all the interest for everything that was by year, everything that had a 1, 2, and so on in it. That's what we wanted it to do. So it guessed the right thing there. Number format. Let's make it currency and negatives with the brackets, no $sign, remove the decimals, and there is that. Okay, that looks good. Let's add the loan reduction. So there's the loan reduction. So once again, this is the amount of the loan decrease on a year-by-year basis. We could do our same thing and say, okay, let's do the formatting of that one. It summed them up. That's what we wanted. Next time, the sum will not be the one we want when we do the loan balance. So we'll have to do something a little different there. But right now, we're going to say, let's format that thing. Currency, bracketed negative, and then the numbers here will make this none, no decimals, and there's that one. Okay. One more time. This one will be a little bit different. The loan balance. Now, this is not right? This is all messed up. That's not the loan balance at the end of year 1 and so on. So what we'll do is we'll hit the drop down on this one, value field, and this time I don't want it to sum. It tried to guess that we want it to sum. It's like, no, not this time. This time I want the minimum balance, meaning I want you to pick up the loan balance at the smallest amount for year 1, which will be at the end of year 1. So we'll see where we stand after or at the end of each of the years. So I'm going to say minimum, and then we'll format it, number format, currency, negative, $sign, none, removing the decimals, okay, and there we have it. So now we got this beautiful table just constructed from the pivot. And this one can actually change. So if I can then select the columns up top if we want, and we could make them a little bit smaller, and it'll do it didn't do the wrap text. I'm going to try to wrap the text, selecting these columns, home tab, and then alignment. Let's see if we can wrap the text and then center it. So you can do your same kind of formatting with it. You might want, to put brackets around it. You could select the data here and say, I'd like to put my little brackets, home tab, font group, and put my lines around it or something like that. Make it look a little bit fancier. You can even take your header possibly and make it our black and white kind of thing if we wanted to do that. But in any case, we could center these maybe. These would be looking nicer if they were centered, wouldn't they? I feel like. So we're going to go Home tab, Alignment, Center. There, we got it. Okay, so in any case, there we have it. Now this one will actually change, unlike the last one we did when we built it with the slicer. So it'll change as we change the data. So you can also do a comparison. If I look at like year 1, so here's year 1 on the slicer, and that matches up with the year 1 here. Note, again, the slicer has a default in that a problem in that when you slice things up, it cuts the rows to whatever is relevant, which is going to mess up anything to the right-hand side of it. That's one of the problems with the slicer. But in any case, you can see we get to the 25,767, the 19,866, the 5,901, as we got over here with our table as well. So now I'm gonna unfilter the slicer. Now, if we were to change something on the left-hand side, say we're gonna change the percent again. Let's say we change that to 2%. This table will refresh automatically. It'll re-amortize. We're down to 0 again. Everything looks great. The slicer works beautifully. You got to do one extra step if you want this one to then change accordingly as well. So in other words, if I go here and now look at this, I've got changes in year 1 that don't line up. So on the pivot table, the default is it stays static unless you right click on it and you want to say refresh the data. And there you go. So now it should be refresh data. So if I go back to year 1, now it should line up. So that's the nice thing about the pivot table. It can basically adjust things in that way. And so it's also nice within the pivot table then that you can extract this data and possibly then do other types of comparisons. So for example, if you wanted to compare the interest on a 5% on a year-by-year basis to the interest on a 2% on a year-by-year basis, you might construct a table which would look something like this. You would have, say, years, and then interest at, let's say 5%, interest at 2%. I'm going to center those. We're going to go to the Home tab, Alignment, Center. Let's make them black and white. Let's wrap the text, Alignment, wrapping the text. Years is going to be 1, 2, 3, and so on. So we'll select those items, dragging on down to 30 on the years, which is going to be right there. So there we have it. And then I can say, okay, let's pull the data from our table then. So I'm going to say, let's make this 5% to start with, 5%. Refresh the table, which means I'm going to just right click on the table and refresh. Now the problem is I cannot really just say this is going to be equal to the amount on the table, because once I change the table, then that could have a problem with the formula. So what I can do, however, is take the static data. I could take and highlight this information. So I'm just going to take that information and I'm going to paste it here, just the values, paste it 1, 2, 3, in other words, values only. And then I can change my pivot table to say I want 2%, making sure I refresh the pivot table, right click on it, refresh the pivot table. And then I can pull my column for the 2% column, taking this data, right click, copy, putting that over here for the 2%, pasting it just the values only, and then the difference would be equal to this minus this. Copying that down, we can just double click on the autofill. We might total it up down below, total. Sum it up equals the SUM of the sum column. Drag that on over. Autofill. Put a little underline over here maybe. Font group underline. Take this whole thing. Do our blue formatting. Home tab, font group. Put the brackets around it. Bucket, blue. We could center the year, alignment center. And then I'm going to just do my format painter over here, home tab, format painter, painting the format to the difference column. Make it a little bit larger so we got the E there. There it is. Spell check it. Check in the spelling. I could spell. See? You see? I know how to spell stuff. So there we have it. So I'm going to bring this pivot table back on over to 5% just on the default. And you could do a lot of stuff, obviously, with the pivot table. Then you could do a lot of, you could see why you might want to pull the data for tax purposes or something like that. Say, well, what would I, 5% versus 2% on the loan? What if I had a, different variance on the loans, and then try to pull that data that you would need over here. Note that this data will not change automatically as you update the pivot table, but you can use the pivot table to pivot around and then build other things from it that you would that might be useful to you. So those are a little bit more advanced on using some table formats, the slicers and the pivot tables.